What industry is struggling way more than people think? Yeah, I ran a small pizza shop for a bit, but I had to close in 2023. The restaurant industry is so much harder than it looks from the outside, especially as an independent restaurant. It's not going to be a popular opinion on Reddit, but the biggest barrier to running a successful independent restaurant, in my opinion, is the labor. There aren't a lot of reliable, hardworking people who want to spend their time working in a mid tier, locally owned kitchen. And I get it, when rent is $1,600 for the crappiest one bedroom apartment you've ever seen, $15 to $20 an hour just doesn't cut it. But at the same time, labor was 50% of the cost of making a pizza when I paid $15 an hour. I'd have to pay $30 an hour or more to provide a living wage to employees, but that would also force me to raise prices by 33% without losing volume. Realistically, I'd have to raise prices by 50% knowing volume would dip after the prices went up. To me, selling $50 pizzas is not a viable business model. Most of the big guys do it by dumbing down all the processes to the point where anyone can be productive within a week. This way, no one else has to try very hard. When people quit with no notice, you don't need to replace them with skilled or hardworking labor. You just get another warm body to follow the picture directions they print out at all the stations. This allows them to operate with the available labor pool and keep prices down, but it comes at the cost of quality. This is, in my opinion, why the quality of goods and services in the US has fallen so hard. Then you add in that we've removed tons of immigrant labor and there aren't enough people with the desire to fill these independent restaurant type jobs. If you had to choose between a job that was easy and a job that was harder and they both pay the same, everyone's choosing the easier jobs, and it's reflected across society right now. I don't know how I'd fix it. I can't blame anyone for being disengaged with a job that barely supports their bare minimum needs, but I can't blame businesses for not living in a fantasy land either. No one's got extra money to pay for goods or services produced with higher quality labor. I guess the real secret ingredient then was a lack of crippling economic pressure and a staff that wasn't trying to outrun it. Story 2. In England, the childcare industry is on its knees since the government is now introducing 30 free hours from 9 months old and is only paying the nurseries and preschools £5 an hour per child to fund this. Many nurseries and preschools will go bankrupt and shut down. No childcare businesses running anymore means a lot of mothers are going to have to stop working, causing a huge crisis across England. Thank you, government. Story 3. Healthcare. I know it seems like all different providers are raking in cash, but insurance companies are destroying a lot of us. We barely, and a lot of times don't, get reimbursed for what we actually do. We end up actually losing money on a test or medication provided because insurance companies are basically allowed to decide what they want to reimburse us for. So if we buy something from a medical store for $500 and insurance decides we should have paid $450, well, then we lose $50, plus don't get paid per providing the service. It's sinking small businesses. A lot of money is still being made in certain areas, but it is getting messy and it is about to burst. Story 4. I work for a pay TV company in the UK. I've been there for 12 years. Every day, we send a report to the bank with a list of credit card numbers and the amount we are going to charge to that card in 7 days' time. The bank runs the numbers and report back all the cards that will be declined. It gives us a head start on non-payments. If the number of declines is more than 1,000, it can suggest the problem is with us and not with the customers. So someone has to manually approve the report if there are more than 1,000. Quite often, it would go over 1,000 around Christmas time and at the end of the summer, as you might expect. The thing is, it used to be set at 1,000 for the first 8 or 9 years I've been here, but we started hitting that number on a daily basis about 3 years ago. Since then, we've had to up the number to 2,000, which only lasted about 18 months before we had the number up again to 4,000. Something bad is coming. Story 5. Science/research. The total job losses are likely several 100,000. This is a permanent end to one of the great American institutions. Trump is withholding funding until universities eliminate campus groups like Black student unions or groups for Native Americans. Stephen Miller's organization is suing multiple universities to try and get settlements. Trump et al. Cannot explain what DEI is. My own lab was basically shut down over DEI, but I legit don't know how our work could be characterized as DEI. Story 6. Most world industry is struggling massively. The world economy is incredibly unstable right now. Historical highs of uninvested money, capital are sitting in onshore and offshore banks, trillions of dollars, enough to build a new and equitable society. But the capitalist sees nowhere to invest, nowhere to secure substantial new profits. The situation will not change. All frontiers are closed, limiting growth. Resources are depleting, and chaos factors like climate change threaten tremendous instability. It is difficult to find analysis of this issue, but the rate of profit around the world is likely at a historical low. Fascism beckons because our rulers will eventually decide to apply great force in order to curve the profit graph even a little bit upward. Story 7. The auto industry, at least in the US, no one knows what direction is up with EVs. Automakers let current models drag on for a lot longer than normal because of coming demand for EVs. Then they launched EVs and found consumers aren't buying them. Pair that with a new administration that is hell-bent against EVs, and automakers are keeping the old car models around even longer. Suppliers who build capital equipment to build cars in the meantime are trying to keep afloat on scraps, and a lot are going under. All the while, BYD and other Chinese EV manufacturers are getting light years ahead of anything even offered for sale in the US, so when they do find a way into the market, it'll probably decimate the whole domestic industry, which is about 10% of our national GDP. It's a very bad situation that people aren't talking about it in the right ways, and no one seems to be figuring out how to actually keep us competitive. Story 8. Pubs in the UK. A lot are now doing food to match competitors, but with extremely slim profit margins. This requires extra staff to pay for a professional kitchen. Breweries are swallowing up independent businesses, especially after lockdown, where most couldn't keep the lights on. They are also competing with large chains that can afford to lose money on certain locations just so they have brand presence. The cost of a pint of beer has become ridiculous in a lot of places, and in the next 10 years, what is now a normal social activity may be seen as a luxury. The thing is, there's no turning back now. Wetherspoons is still cheap, but for pubs that are independent, and I dare say with more character, the end has already begun. Story 9. Pretty much every sector and industry is struggling. Large-scale capital investors and the owner class, like private equity, are increasingly buying industries and trying to increase profits at the expense of long-term growth. Government has completely decided that it should play no role in future investments apart from huge tax breaks and incentives for the largest tech companies. None of this investment will benefit the working class at all. Almost all white-collar industries are outsourcing hugely to lower-cost countries and laying off workforces even as quarterly profits are incredibly high. The US has largely closed its borders economically and literally, which is raising prices and destroying most industries that rely on global supply chains, which are almost all industries. The better question would be, which industries are doing well? Data centers are experiencing a huge boom due to the AI industry, which requires massive amounts of power and energy to fuel these tools. It'll probably be around a decade before we can accurately say how much damage Trump has done, even just this year. Story 10. Education. There is a shortage of teachers in many states who deal with students who appear to be more apathetic each year. Students, whether they have their phones in class or not, have access to get their questions and homework answered by AI or other web-based services. The school shooting issue continues to hang over many students and parents, which makes homeschooling a much more considerable thought than in the past. The cost of college has almost tripled since the 90s, which means that if you graduated from college anywhere near that time and had children, you are looking at astronomical prices for a higher level of education that won't pay your children back for the cost of the degree. Story 11. Nursing and other healthcare workers. We are always being asked to do more with less. There isn't a true nursing shortage. There's a shortage of nurses who are willing to put up with ever-worsening working conditions in hospitals for less pay. Pay has sort of increased a little across the board since lockdown, but not by much. Not nearly close to keeping up with inflation, that's for sure. It's not unusual for nurses to only work a year or two in a hospital and then leave the profession altogether or find some other kind of non-traditional nursing job. What sucks is that people are so desperate to get out of the hospital, they are willing to accept lower wages at other types of jobs, like clinics, which sometimes aren't necessarily any better, honestly, but it's a pick-your-poison scenario, and unstable work-from-home jobs like doing chart reviews for insurance companies. It's super difficult to get one of these jobs, and when you do, it might not last, and they pay way less. But that's how badly people are getting burned out from working in hospitals where corporate greed is ruining pretty much everything. Crap, even doctors are getting very burned out. I mean, they always have. They have always been put through the ringer in residency and fellowship, which leaves you burned out right from the get-go. But I feel it's getting worse. They are being given absolutely insane patient loads to deal with. Yeah, they get paid a lot, but at what cost? I know a lot of docs who are choosing to do less traditional work, like being a locums doc, working hard for part of the year, and then just chilling the rest. Or choosing to only work part-time because they at least make enough that way and can spend less time being stressed the heck out. I've worked in some hospitals where you call a doc about a patient and they have no freaking clue who you are talking about. And honestly, they can at a certain point. You can give them a refresher as a standard, calling about Bob Smith, 65M in room age 22, he's here with heart failure, blah, 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 blah. But sometimes they still can't remember because they've just seen too many people that day. Is that who you want taking care of you? And it's 10 times worse for surgeons and other procedural docs. These folks can be up 24 plus hours straight just doing surgeries and procedures. Is that really who you want trying to save your life at 2 a.m.? But it's quote-unquote too expensive to hire them into separate shifts. Meanwhile, health insurance companies laugh their way to the bank along with the hospital C-suite. Nobody there is thinking, my $5 million bonus is a bit of an excessive expense, let's cut that one out of the budget. Story 12, emergency medical services. It was thought that because of the aging population, EMS would have a boom. But the truth is, low and stagnant wages, overwork, lack of benefits, and reductions in the amount of money reimbursed by insurance companies have meant that these services are struggling to recruit and retain employees. Those things, coupled with the fact that most states do not see EMSs as an essential service like fire or police, mean that governments don't even budget enough money for them to exist. Most EMS services in the US are volunteer, and even the ones that are paid do not pay their employees a livable wage. This leads to a very high turnover and trouble recruiting. There's just no money in it anymore, and everyone is leaving. In New York City, we are at a crisis. Story 13. A full-time vendor enters the chat. We are not okay. Vendor fees have skyrocketed, fewer people show up, and even fewer people buy. I think in the next 2 years, you will no longer have the craft fairs, farmers markets, and vendor events that people say they love. I sat in over 100-degree heat for 8 hours. Setting up and taking down in that heat is a near-death experience. All joking aside, it's a workout in 100 degrees. No one comes out like they used to, or they come out because it's something free to walk around at, but they don't spend. I made $200, but I spent $75 on the vendor fee. That's a $125 profit to cover the time and cost to make the goods, gas, insurance, being in 100 degrees for 8 hours, etc. These same events used to bring in $600 to $1,000. My hourly wage was probably lower than minimum wage. My career was marketing, and my end goal has always been a scalable, larger company, but most vendors only do events as their sole income, and it has worked for more than 10 years. None of us vendors are making it anymore on vendor events alone. Story 14. Entertainment, film and TV. Almost all of the shows and movies you watch, particularly in the US, are financed by US studios and shot outside the country, with even post-production and visual effects being done in Europe, the UK, India, and China. These movies and shows used to employ thousands of US workers and laborers whose jobs have now been outsourced. You'd never know it because the actors speak in American accents and the sets are designed to look like places in the US. If you look at the end of the credits, you can see what foreign countries provided the studios with more than 30% tax rebates to make their show there. Story 15. Pharmaceutical industry / biotech. About 3 years ago, the sector crashed. Something like 200 out of 205 stocks were all red for the entire year. Go look up Moderna, for example. During the lockdown, it was the most valued pharma / biotech in the world, and now it is almost a zero. The loss in value is just crazy. The entire sector is just rife with huge job losses and layoffs. People have been applying for over a year and are still unemployed. There are 800 applicants per job, etc. Add to that thousands of unemployed scientists from the NIH, FDA, EPA, CDC, etc. Just a massive glut of brain power in the US that is woefully unemployed. Story 16. Medicine in the US. Those of us who take care of the patients are getting fewer by both raw numbers and by percentage of employees, while the number of non-clinical personnel, emailers, is increasing. But only clinical personnel generate revenue, and reimbursement has been steadily declining over the years. So you end up with lower revenue and higher expenses due to all the wait. We are steadily approaching an unsustainable financial situation, and when the system breaks, I don't know what happens to the pieces. On a personal note, my pay has declined over the past decade. This is in raw numbers only and does not take into account the further effect of inflation. My colleagues are all in the same boat. I'm not unique. Add on to this the incredible pain in the bum that corporate introduces into my work week, plus patients becoming progressively more mean, mostly to staff members, but I am not entirely immune from it. This makes people want to get out of clinical medicine, hence all the nurses switching to admin-only jobs, and physicians becoming part-time or retiring at their earliest opportunity. We have a shortage of physicians in the US already, projected to worsen as the cohort of older people gets bigger. Older means sicker, which means more total appointments needed. I don't know if anyone is taking into account the youngish physicians are not going to work as long as previous generations. You better believe I'll retire when I am financially able. I will not work into my 70s like many older docs did. Story 17. Nonprofits. They always had a tough time, but the ones that especially relied on federal money are all on the ropes right now. And then the ones that relied on state money are still iffy because that state money usually started as federal. The only ones that might be okay are the ones that are self or privately funded, but that's asking for a lot. It's so funny too because I'll talk to people about it and they'll always have some response that wavers between, well, I don't think it was that necessary and the government shouldn't be funding it, or if they provided a service people need, then the private sector will pay for it. But I don't think those people, or a lot of Americans really, realize how much these places rely on that government money or how essential they are to supporting many of our citizens. We don't really have a country that's full of community centers or churches providing these services anymore. So when the nonprofits start to go, there are a lot of local services that just aren't going to be there anymore. Story 18. People are starting to realize it, but air traffic control. We've had understaffing issues since Ronald Reagan decided to fire all the controllers who went on strike after he decided not to follow through on his campaign promises. It's obviously now to the point that it's super dangerous because not only are we losing a bunch of controllers, the process to become one has, last number I remember, a 70% failure rate. That's after you get accepted, and they only accept like 40% of the people who apply. There needs to be some serious changes, and it needs to happen fast. They use systems in some towers that were the same in the 80s. The equipment that we used to train on had black spots in the screen, so when screens are blacking out in Newark, it seems like that was a good preparation. It's absolutely ridiculous. We handwrite out flights and send them down a chute for departure to do their jobs. It's an insane and hard job, which is also why people aren't applying. Story 19. Commercial real estate, especially office and some retail spaces. Most people see an empty storefront or office building here and there, but I don't think the general public grasps the sheer scale of the problem or how fundamentally the landscape has shifted. The work from home/hybrid shift isn't a temporary thing for many companies, it's a core operational change. Long-term leases signed pre-pandemic are now expiring, and businesses are either significantly downsizing their physical footprint, not renewing at all, or opting for flexible co-working spaces. This means massive vacancies in prime locations. The real ticking time bomb is the debt. Trillions of dollars in commercial property loans are coming due in the next few years, many of which were originated when interest rates were low and property valuations were sky high. With higher rates, lower occupancy, and declining property values, many owners can't refinance or are underwater on their mortgages. This is going to hit regional banks hard, and it has huge implications for city tax bases, property taxes, local businesses that relied on office workers, restaurants, dry cleaners, cafes, and even public transit systems. It's a slow-motion crash, not a sudden burst, which is why it feels like it's flying under the radar compared to its potential impact. Story 20. American manufacturing. Our machine shop is the slowest it's been in years, and I know 2 other nearby shops that closed their doors within the last week. One friend from yet another shop imported a new CNC machine that they ordered 8 months ago, but now it's got an extra $100,000 in tariffs that they cannot afford, and so they cannot take delivery of the machine. New machines, tooling, etc. are all unaffordable now because of tariffs, and sales projections are down because of uncertainty, bringing new orders down with them. The US doesn't build any of the specialized machines we use, so there aren't other options. Thanks, dear leader. Story 21. American lobster. Over the past couple of decades, the lobster catch has had a historically huge catch. No more. The catch has been declining and the juvenile population is low, indicating continued decline. Lobster is a luxury market, but the decline is going to hurt not just the fishermen and wholesalers, but processors and everyone down the chain. The lobster fishery in Maine is probably the biggest and only one that remains. Gone are the days that if one fishery collapsed, the fishermen could just catch something else. So many fisheries have dwindled there aren't many options left, and each fishery takes special investment, license, and knowledge to even attempt. Hard times ahead. Story 22. Bowling alleys. My dad owns one. My family has always bowled. We used to have 7 or 8 bowling alleys in the area, and all of them would be packed. Now it's primarily just ours and 2 others. I hear stories about how awesome it used to be. I bowled for high school and our team was pretty good. I live in a northern state, so it's more popular. Since I graduated, it has gone way downhill. I know it isn't a super exciting or strenuous sport, but bowling leagues are great for community and provide great opportunities to meet people. Support your local centers. Bolero is a giant corporation and is trying to buy out local centers that actually care for the sport and their buildings. And if you're enjoying the video so far, please don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos just like this. Story 23. Environmental protection. Yes, it is an industry mostly associated with construction. We have scientists, engineers, policy specialists, technicians, admins, and more. We help organizations build things in compliance with environmental laws with the broader goal of keeping the environment intact for the surrounding community and for future generations. And we are hanging on by a thread. The EPA contacts we rely on are gone. The Council on Environmental Quality is taking a chainsaw to the rulebook, and internships have completely dried up because no one would choose to be an environmental major in this economy. Pay has gone from little to scraps. Americans take it for granted that a new downtown building won't poison their water supply. They take it for granted that city dumps don't open in residential neighborhoods. They take it for granted that their needs in their everyday lives are considered before construction ever starts. They take it for granted that they can use the grid to light their homes without suffering from respiratory issues from living near the power plants. All of these things are common in third world countries and will absolutely come to the US in the next few years. The rules are already gutted. The changes are already made. This will be the reality in the US soon, all because avoiding catastrophic environmental damage impedes profit. Because forcing children to pay for inhalers is cheaper than forcing Southern Company to install their smokestacks correctly. Environmentalists are done. EPA resumes are flooding the market, but there's nowhere to put them. Their expertise is in navigating EPA regulations, but those regulations don't matter anymore, so why would anyone need them? It's so grim. These people have kept us safe from the consequences of our own productivity for their entire careers, and we've all but thrown them away. We didn't even recycle them. Story 24. Dentistry, believe it or not, is struggling. Insurance reimbursements are no longer covering overhead, and supply costs are rising. The amount of supplies needed for each patient can be extensive, and many dentists are now losing money on cleanings. To make ends meet, most private dental practices are dropping their participation in insurance networks. Soon, if you want to use insurance, you'll most likely only be able to use it at a corporate office. The quality of care at these corporate offices is often not in the best interest of the patient. They have production quotas, and the new dental graduates they hire feel immense pressure to meet these goals, fearing job loss and the inability to pay off their huge student loans. Story 25. This may not be as drastic as other examples, but I've started to see some clear trends in digital marketing. In India, digital marketing companies used to make good money from clients in the Middle East and other foreign countries. However, with the rise of AI, many jobs within the industry, like those for content writers and graphic designers, have seen a massive reduction in scope. A decade ago, you needed a team of 4 or 5 people to manage the digital marketing and content for a medium-sized company. Today, a team of 1 or 2 is expected to do the same work using AI tools and automation. Furthermore, Meta and Google have a monopoly on the available advertising platforms, which makes it difficult for small businesses to run profitable campaigns. Story 26. This is more for the US, and I'm not sure it's a more than people think, so much as more than people realize, that aviation is facing a serious issue. Pilots, air traffic controllers, and mechanics are all either aging out or in short supply. Decades of telling kids that college was the only path to success and that only users and losers go into the trades is finally coming to pass. In my opinion, it's part of the reason we've been seeing an uptick in aviation accidents lately. If only 1 or 2 of the 3 professions were retaining experienced people, things wouldn't be as noticeable. However, with air traffic controllers having mandatory early retirements and older pilots and mechanics retiring in droves, I believe we're only starting to see the lack of experience show. The FAA, Federal Aviation Administration, has historically been reactionary, not proactive. Over the past 5 to 10 years, this has changed slightly, but I worry about some of the changes the current administration has been making. They are taking the FAA back to being reactionary instead of a tool in everyone's toolbox to make everyone safer, which is another problem stacking on top of these staffing shortages. For God's sake, get your kids into the trades. The money to be made and the benefits to be had are probably some of the best out there for the American middle class. This isn't just true for aviation either. Plumbing, electrical, automotive, heavy equipment technicians, and a ton of other professions desperately need people. Story 27. The software development market is struggling, particularly for junior developers. At least in Sweden, the market was becoming saturated with a surge of students eager to enter this lucrative field. Then AI happened, and it specializes in their exact job, small-scale, introductory projects. It's a funny situation because even if senior developers aren't directly targeted at this point, their roles are more about engineering and client meetings. At some point, you'll need new seniors. So companies are digging a hole for themselves by not hiring juniors. Still, in the short term, it doesn't make as much sense to a CEO, and they look first and foremost to short-term profits. Also, those juniors will now rely on AI for coding, which risks putting them on their back foot. It doesn't teach them the skills they'll need once they move to a higher level of engineering and have to orient themselves within large, old projects. We are in interesting times. It feels like we're going all in on AI, but if that doesn't get us all the way there across the organization, we might be in for trouble in a few years. When that happens, this market will likely open up again with fast-tracked hires and courses in project and team leadership. Story 28. I work in fast-moving consumer goods, FMCG, food manufacturing on the commercial finance and planning side, so I tend to see the big picture more than the on-the-ground production. The industry is struggling with a combination of increased costs in raw materials, energy, and labor, as well as a growing reliance on private equity. These firms are essentially stripping manufacturers of their assets. For example, I once worked for a major retailer in the UK as part of their new space team. They were bought by a private equity firm that proceeded to sell many of the stores to another business that the private equity group owned and then rent them back. The firm claimed that this was to generate cash to invest, but I called out in a meeting that the cost would mount in the long term. I was dismissed with, "Don't worry, they know what they're doing." Lo and behold, the company is now struggling just to balance its books. Story 29. Psychotherapy. We are exploited and underpaid everywhere we go, have tens of thousands of dollars in debt, and we have to choose between a few difficult options. We can join an agency where we have to see 30 plus clients a week, which is unethical and leads to burnout. Alternatively, we can join a smaller group or private practice where we struggle to get client referrals because tech companies now have huge contracts with directories like Psychology Today and with insurance companies. Or we can sell our souls to said companies such as BetterHelp to be poorly paid and have horrible protection of client data. And that's not to mention the issue of insurance clawbacks. You can Google that for a wild ride. Our employment hardly ever comes with health insurance, PTO, or other benefits. When you don't work, you don't get paid. We also have to pay for our own supervision and continuing education requirements. All of this happens while we are helping people through the most difficult times in their lives and providing support for mental health, which often stems from unmet material needs that we can't help them with. We are capitalism's janitors, and many of us can barely pay our own bills. Story 30. The audio industry, across the board, including radio, podcasting, TV, film, music, and gaming, is struggling. Even though all forms of media rely on good sound, they often treat sound and sound engineers as an afterthought, and they pay as such. Although new movies, shows, games, podcasts, and concerts come out consistently each year, the companies behind them try their best to do everything on the cheap. This means low wages, no benefits, and so on. Meanwhile, billions of dollars go into their pockets just as in other industries, I'm sure. It's annoying, and if I didn't love this line of work so much, or if I had other skills, I'd definitely pursue something else. Story 31. American manufacturing has been basically that scene from SpongeBob where everything is on fire and everyone's freaking out. We'll source a key material, get 80% of the way through all the testing, paperwork, and registrations, and then the supplier backs out because of new tariffs. This leaves us back at square one. This has been happening all year. There are materials we used to buy by the container load that we haven't been able to source since February. We have suppliers whose suppliers are backing out, and we have clients who can't start projects for weeks and weeks because of these delays. Meanwhile, while we can't source anything, all our phones are ringing off the hook because our hauling partners can't find any loads to move. They are practically begging for us to move something, anything, just so their trucks can get on the road. This isn't just me, it's all my colleagues and all my industry contacts. Everyone in my professional sphere is biting their nails on the edge of their seats waiting for the layoffs to start again. Story 32. The price increases are just as bad for non-big box stores, and people struggle to realize that it hits us much harder. Walmart, Meijer, Menards, Target, and other big retailers can order hundreds or thousands of an item for a much lower price. We can only order a handful of that same item because we don't have the space or the money to order that much, so we pay a higher price. We then have to charge you more. This irritates customers, so they stop coming and we struggle to pay our staff, which leads to cutbacks. Eventually, we can't pay our bills and have to close. On top of all of that, our rent keeps going up, local utility costs are increasing, and repairs are needed for our buildings. So many things keep us struggling. Please, I beg all of you, just shop local, shop small businesses. We need your help. Story 33. I'm delighted, to be honest. For too long, radio stations and their staff are acting like rock stars with exorbitant salaries, parties costing hundreds of thousands, free tickets to every event in their region or nation, and a general fame complex among all staffers. All this came at a time when radio has been on the decline for decades, losing out to newer media technologies every passing year. Despite all this, the content they produced was terrible and only getting worse with more and more ad breaks every time I tuned in. They were literally cutting to ads every 5 minutes in the mornings. The only generations of people keeping radio going are the same ones keeping cable and satellite TV going, older people who don't know any better. I look forward to the day that radio goes out. Story 34. A massive skills gap is emerging in several fields, including engineering, delivery driving, especially for heavy goods vehicles, and manual labor, such as fruit picking and seasonal farm work. This also affects all manufacturing industries that require skilled workers. Since the 1990s, schools have pushed students towards careers in IT, computing, business, healthcare, or beauty. As a result, there are not enough new engineers, electricians, or plumbers to replace retirees. The UK also lost many of its dentists when Brexit happened, as they were all from Eastern Europe. The same is true for heavy goods vehicle drivers. This skills gap is getting wider and wider as the majority of Gen Z seems dependent on technology and unable to think for themselves, reason, or question what they read or hear. They appear so entitled and selfish, wanting to make money on social media without any effort. I have visions of a prime minister in 20 years with his mom standing behind him telling him what to say and do, and imagine their offspring. Parliament will just be a constant argument over who has been offended, who needs canceling, and who needs hanging. Story 35. North American construction. I think even the workers aren't aware of how bad North American construction is. Lockdown saw a surge in safety and safety culture. Without actually making any workers safer, it successfully added billions of dollars in project costs. This increases the cost of everything for the consumer, from housing to transit to food. As a result, North American construction has become the most expensive in the world. In the last few years, there has been a hiring crunch to get anyone with a pulse into construction, but that might last one more year before consumers stop paying for this. Just one example, a few primary companies I've worked with adopted a standard during lockdown that, quote, all trenches are confined spaces, because of the biological risk. A confined space is any area where human occupation is high risk and the oxygen level could be reduced. You take special precautions in these spaces, such as using SCBA gear, winches to pull people out if they faint, and extra staff to monitor the space. Typically, this would apply to things like being underneath a building, a basement where you're doing foundation work, or inside a manhole. Trenches are simply excavations that are deeper than they are wide, and you deal with them by assuring the walls to prevent collapse. Adding the extra layer of quote-unquote confined space means hiring 2 more full-time employees to monitor and record. It also requires all of them to have fall arrest and confined space monitor training. Combined, the training costs about $300 per employee and takes about 3 days. You have to pay them their wage to do that, so you're looking at about $240 to $400 a day. In total, it costs about $5,000 to get a small crew trained for this kind of work. That doesn't even include lost productivity, which would be another $50 per hour per employee over a 12-hour day. Add that in, and you're looking at another $5,400 in losses that get eaten up by the project cost and passed on to consumers. And that doesn't even include project delays, which would add even more costs. Eventually, people will just decide they don't want to pay for this, and now you'll need 1/3 fewer people with 100% less training. Story 36, the transportation and trucking industry. People see trucks rolling down the road and stuff on store shelves and think everything's fine, but it's really not. During the supply chain crunch of the pandemic, freight rates skyrocketed. Retailers were willing to directly hire independent truckers and pay them thousands of dollars to go into the ports and grab containers of their holiday goods just to haul them a few miles down the road. As a result, a lot of people bought trucks. Because the used truck market was low on supply, most of these trucks were overpriced and financed through small banks willing to take a risk for a quick buck. Now, the freight market is at normal capacity, but there are tens of thousands more trucks than there should be. Between all the trucks competing for any freight to move at all and third-party freight brokerages taking larger cuts than they should, most loaded trucks you see rolling down the road are not making a profit. Normally, all of these small mom-and-pop fly-by-night style operations would just go belly up and things would stabilize after a year, but the small banks that finance the equipment won't let them. They can't just repossess these trucks because they're practically worthless now, and the owners can't make the payments because they're not making any money. So the banks are just extending the loans. All of our costs are going up, freight rates are significantly lower than they should be, and most drivers, like myself, haven't seen a significant pay raise in years. The banks aren't allowing the market to correct itself. In my company, in particular, our CEO said he can't cut any more costs. He said we either start getting significantly better fuel economy out of these trucks or we're all going to be out of a job. The whole industry is a giant bubble that's eventually going to pop. Story 37. Biomedical research in the US is a bit of a crap show at many universities and research institutes. The industry is struggling with a combination of canceled grants, delays in decisions for new grants, and threats of budget cuts. As a result, skilled researchers are losing their jobs, hiring freezes are screwing over recent graduates, and reduced cohort sizes in graduate programs are hurting the development of the next generation of scientists. The news cycle has moved on, but lasting harm is being done to the entire biomedical research enterprise. This will likely have major consequences for the private sector as well. Regardless of your politics or even where you're from, this kind of sucks for all of us. Story 38. The automotive repair industry is struggling. For years, cars have been made less and less fixable. It's often easier to finance a new car than to finance the repairs on an otherwise good one. Additionally, extended oil change intervals are designed to last just long enough to get you outside the warranty period. After 6 or 7 years, there's nothing left of the car. Most technicians are paid what's called a flat rate, where they get a set number of hours for each repair, regardless of how long it actually takes them. What they receive is a lot less than what you pay at the front counter, usually less than a quarter of it. If there isn't any work, they aren't making any money, and there's a massive upfront investment in tools and education just to get into the field. Story 39. I'm probably wrong, but I've been joking about looking at real estate for years. It seems to be propped up by investor houses, but real sellers out there are having houses sit on the market for a while now. Even flipped houses are starting to sit for months. For the first time in a long time, it seems to be transitioning to a buyer's market. Paired with a bad economy, high inflation, and high interest rates, it seems poised to me to do some weird stuff. I'm not knowledgeable enough to know when or what, but I wouldn't buy or sell right now. The only exception would be if you bought your house at an overvalued price and were trying to cut your losses. But then you would need to haggle hard on both sides to get a higher price when you sell and a lower price when you buy, and that seems tough to do right now. Story 40. Indie game and software development. Many people are well aware of the collapse of the gaming industry due to the many layoffs occurring in big companies like EA and Ubisoft, but they are less aware of what is happening in indie development. I watched half the company I work for get laid off last September, and then half of my team got laid off 8 months later. My team went from 32 people down to 10. And up until about 2 months ago, many people on my team were essentially begged to take as much time off as possible because there wasn't enough work to go around. We actually almost closed our QA team entirely so we could be turned into an incentive for future contracts. This would mean our development team could offer their services and hours at no additional cost, making our company more lucrative to potential clients. It seems like as of the last 2 months, things are just starting to stabilize for us again. Story 41. The video game industry. Unless you're an indie studio or Nintendo, things are not good in the video game industry right now. People are angry about game quality, prices, microtransactions, FOMO, battle passes, live services, and all of that BS. Nintendo prints money. Nintendo won the console wars the day Pokemon came out, and then it's been a fight for second place ever since. These other companies just keep adding more graphics and more crap into their games instead of making games that are actually fun. Square Enix had this ace up their sleeve, a money-making machine that would only be used if everything was going to hell. That was the Final Fantasy VII Remake. That's when it became clear the spiral had begun. Indie games don't have this issue though because they can make games that just focus on gameplay without spending a lot on graphics and other stuff, so they're doing fine. But everyone except them and Nintendo is going down, and fast. Story 42. People used to put a radio station on at work. They could enjoy music while working, but some stations now have way too many commercials and the DJs talk too damn much. KROC was a great station at one time with the creepy Rodney Bingenheimer doing the midnight time slot. Dr. Drew got his start there, as did Adam Carolla with his show, Loveline. Those were the days. There was a radio station at 106.7 FM in Tijuana, Mexico that I could pick up on AM at night in South Lake Tahoe. In San Diego, most radio stations broadcast from Tijuana. In Mexico, there's a law that all radio stations must have a national hour on Sunday and play ranchero music. So for 1 hour, you go from rock and the Billboard Top 100 to ranchero music. LOL. Gas was also 15 pesos a liter at Pemex. In the US, it was $1.50 per gallon. For 65 cents a gallon, I could fill up for $8. A liter is almost exactly a quart. That's as much of the metric system as I can deal with. The normal temperature for patients is 37 degrees Celsius. And if any of these stories got to you, here's more for you. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. I'll catch you in that video.